Hello and welcome to this lesson where we're going to focus on environment design basics. So in the context of designing game backgrounds, we're usually going to be designing a background that has a sense of environment to it, as in if it's a 3D physical space. And so in doing that, there's a couple things that we need to kind of understand and realize before we begin designing and what really makes a good background design for a game. So here we have a picture of some mountains, and I chose this because it does a really good job of illustrating a very important aspect of environment design, and that is, how can we go about creating a sense of depth? Well, we can notice here we have several different mountain ranges or just hills, and some are very far, and then this one is actually very close. The one thing that we can notice about this, though, is that the objects or the mountain ranges in the far distance have less contrast than those in the foreground. So each mountain range that gets a little bit closer becomes a little bit darker. And this is something that is usually seen. There are exceptions, of course, depending on the camera and the angle and such. But when we're looking at depth from this perspective, this is usually how it plays out, where objects in the background are much lighter. And then as we get closer to the midground, we can see a little bit more detail, and they get darker and darker and darker. All right, so this can be seen in several other images as well, which I'll show you. So we can see this very vast mountain range way in the back. You could just barely see it, though it's just a little bit darker than the sky. And then we come here to the foreground, or midground rather, and we can see a little bit more detail. It's a little bit darker, and there's a little bit more contrast. And then we get here to the foreground, and we have trees, and we can see individual leaves practically. So here's another image that illustrates that idea quite well. We have something far in the distance, which is the mountain range, and then we have the mid-ground area around here, and it becomes a little bit darker with more contrast. And then we have the foreground, and we have a lot of different contrasts here, and we can see a lot more detail. So that's another thing that's also universal. So objects in the foreground are also going to have a lot more detail. In objects in the background, you're going to have more simplicity and less detail. And also another important thing that I want to touch on is the idea of light sources. So there's always going to be a light source when you're talking about environments or you're trying to design one. We can obviously tell that this light source is coming up over here, as the highlights on the sheep here are coming from this direction, and then it's a little bit darker over here on the right side. And we can also see shadows are cast onto the ground as well. So if we move over here, this one isn't necessarily an image that's showing a vast distance. This is actually pretty close, but we can still see that same concept playing out in terms of contrast from the background coming to the midground around here, and then ultimately to the ultimate foreground, which is right around here. We can see much more contrast and details. And then just one more image to really reinforce the idea that we definitely need to establish in a light source. That way we can define our highlights and our midtones and shadows, and any shadows that may cast onto the ground as well. So I just wanted to do that video real quickly just to introduce those couple concepts, which are absolutely crucial really when it comes to environment design for games in your game background specifically. So we'll be using all those techniques and principles and applying them in our two projects. So in the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and focus on tiling background designs. All right, I'll see you then.